Hey Natalie, how are you? Hi guys, thanks for joining. Great, Gráinne's there. So hi guys, thank you for joining me this evening. I was really keen to talk about diastasis simply because it's an incredibly important topic that affects lots of women postnatally, and if you Google it you will find lots and lots of conflicting information, and what's really important is that we're sharing evidence-based information that allows us to change the narrative around this topic to best help you. So I'm hoping that tonight we answer some of your questions. We've had a lot, so we'll do our best to answer as many questions as we can. I want to bust some myths around diastasis and signpost you to some great resources, because at the moment, in this climate, it's quite hard to see some of the well-trained postnatal instructors and pelvic health physiotherapists. Now, who better to do this with than my very good friend, Gráinne, who is quite frankly amazing in my opinion and in most others. She co-authored the Return to Running Postnatal Guidelines with me. She is my co-host on our new podcast at your Cervix. She's also the clinical team lead in the NHS and private practice, and she's involved in a lot of research around diastasis, which is really exciting and really significant. Most importantly, she is unbelievably a mum of 4 very young children as well, so she's a bit of a superhuman, and I'm really excited that she's joining us today. So without further ado, let me invite her on, and hopefully in the next minute or two she will be with us. We both have very dodgy internet connection, and as if you've ever been to one of my Instagram lives before, they do seem to go in and out, so hopefully
Hi. You can see me okay?
I'm all right. How are you?
Good. I'm blending kind of into my wall background. I hope you can see me because I'm the same colour.
We see your head. You look lovely. You're not blending at all. You look wonderful. So I thought we'd get started quite promptly because we've had so many, well, so many questions on this. I don't think we're going to have a chance to cover them all, but I thought the first part we might talk about what diastasis or diastasis is, the basics around it, and then we'll get on to some of the questions from some of the ladies that have asked, and then we'll tie everything up by signposting people to some really good resources, some amazing clinicians out there, and so that when people perhaps watch this back, they've got all the information at hand to help with their rehab and their onward journey with diastasis. How does that sound?
That sounds really good. Happy to get stuck in.
Awesome. Now, you've gone a bit crackly my end, but that could be my end. So, guys, if you're struggling with hearing myself or Gráinne, just let us know. But Gráinne, can you hear me okay?
I can hear you okay. The video is slow at times, but I can hear the audio, no problem.
Okay. Brilliant. So first of all, can you tell us what diastasis? I will forever have a problem with this word. What is it?
What is it? The million-dollar question. Diastasis is something that more and more women are likely to be hearing about during their pregnancy. It's a thinning and widening of the linea alba, which is actually just connective tissue that runs along, can you see me there? Along the midline of our abdominal wall, so either side of our six-pack muscle, the rectus abdominis muscle. So there's connective tissue joining it. Yes, thank you, Emma. And during pregnancy, this tissue is probably designed by nature to stretch and give, because the abdominal wall has to grow and widen. And so diastasis is technically when it doesn't resolve. So the majority of women do naturally find that that tissue thins and widens. They probably don't notice it, and as part of the postpartum process, it naturally just resolves. Whereas with approximately about 1/3, the research will tell us, 1/3 of women tend to have ongoing issues with this pendular abdomen, this mummy tummy, this weakness that goes on. And so it can be quite a distressing issue, and it's something that many women are very fearful about. And then there's also the aspect that even in this day and age, when we think we talk so much about it, there will be many women who have this tummy that they don't know what's wrong with, and they will eventually hopefully stumble on the idea of it being diastasis. And this is where something like you're doing here today, Emma, is so important because women need to know about this.
Yeah, absolutely. Are there risk factors? So will it definitely happen to one particular lady, or is it not that simple?
I think that cut out, but were you asking, is are risk factors for it, was it?
Yes. Does it affect a particular woman or not?
So unfortunately, the research isn't that conclusive yet. We don't definitively know who will get diastasis and who won't. Some factors and certainly clinical correlations that we see and some of the low quality research that exists might tell us that obviously increased parity. So when women have more than one baby, or the more babies we have, the more risk we may have to develop diastasis. Also things like women who have either jobs or lifestyles that involve a lot of heavy lifting. So I don't entirely know exactly how much that constitutes. Is it heavy lifting carrying toddlers? I think it's usually people who look after young kids, but even if they have a job of heavy lifting. And there's a lot of confusion and a lot of conflicting messages out there about things like if you have a cesarean section, you might be more likely to have diastasis, but really the research isn't strong enough to make that call. Lots of women you've had cesarean sections. I know that you did have some diastasis, did you, Emma? You did?
Yeah, I had 2 C-sections and I had a diastasis after my first, but it's definitely worse after my second. Yeah. And actually, okay. Anecdotally, I do see a correlation with women who have had C-section and diastasis, but that's purely my clinical experience. But as you say, there's not an absolute on that. So we probably need to focus more on the research around that.
Totally agree, and it's certainly, there are some things that even I see clinically that just aren't represented in the research yet. What I think is important is that the education and advice we put out there should be based on the research, because to make a call and say that cesarean section will increase your risk for diastasis or is likely is a very big statement to do if it's not backed up with strong enough research. And it can be, some women we can't control our birth delivery modes, and so I think that, you know, people shouldn't feel that any of their decisions or the way the events turned had any influence on it. I think what will likely in the future be proven more and more is the idea of genetics. I think that some women's connective tissue is more favourable to stretch than others. We see that some women get stretch marks, other women don't. So what does that say about our collagen makeup? And one study that did look at women who were undergoing a tummy tuck, they took a sample of the linea alba, so that connective tissue in the middle, and compared women who were getting a tummy tuck and a diastasis repair because they had widened linea alba, and against the connective tissue of women who just had the tummy tuck and didn't have any increased widening at the linea alba. And they found that the collagen makeup was slightly different. So there likely is an influence of our genetic predisposition. So I want that even to be a message that resonates with anyone listening to this, that sometimes getting these issues is beyond our control. And you know, I think a lot of women put blame on themselves about they should have done this, shoulda, woulda, coulda. A lot of times, no matter what you would have done, you may have had that increased widening. Again, it's a natural bodily process, and it's just something that we have to learn how to navigate around, rather than, I suppose, have these ideas about absolute prevention of them.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I hear that a lot. Or if I just not exercised, or if I just done a bit more exercise, well, maybe. But I think it's, as you say, it's just not fair to make that assumption. We don't have any evidence around that yet. And there is no blame. It's not a blame game. It's the same as pelvic floor issues, urinary incontinence. You know, it happens to some women, it doesn't happen to others. Okay, so tell me, how do we test, or how does someone test themselves for diastasis? What are they feeling for?
Okay, so is this after pregnancy?
Sorry, this is after pregnancy, yes.
Okay, perfect. So what I would say is, usually we are aware of testing maybe lying on our back with our knees bent and feet flat on the floor. And you can often use your fingers and just press them into your belly, just maybe above the belly button. And I usually get people to do a head lift. Mm-hmm. When we do that, Emma, we usually feel the borders of the muscles. So you don't have to be someone who knows a lot about muscles in your body to understand this. If you feel in and you do a head lift, you usually feel the borders of the muscle either around your fingers, or they just simply push your fingers out, which means there's no real gap. But sometimes you can feel the border around your muscles and you can feel it hug them, and you'll know then how many fingers fit in between. Now, we're not too hung up on the fingers and the gap so much anymore, and we know that it's about much more than just the gap. But everybody wants to know what their gap is, so I think it's a fair thing. I know that I'd probably want to know how many fingers I could fit in. So yeah, I still think it's got a worthwhile measurement, and it's also something that can be a real motivator, because as you start to rehab and do things to try and, I suppose, improve the function of the abdominal wall, if you start to find that gap changes, it's really, really encouraging to keep going. So yes, you can do that, and there's certain if you even Google, you'll be able to see people doing that, and you can focus on not just how many fingers you fit in, but also how deep you sink in. And you might find that different lengths along that connective tissue, from the below your sternum or below your breastbone down to the pubic bone, you might find different widths and different depths along it. So yeah, I'll actually, we have a blog. The Pelvic Roar blog might not describe how to assess diastasis, but we'll definitely share it afterwards, because it's free to access and has a lot of information.
Yeah, brilliant. So they're feeling for the gap, but they're feeling for tension as well. Can you talk a little bit more about tension, because I think that's a newer concept to people?
Yeah. So Dan Lee, sorry, my message is away. Dan Lee was really, really influential in her research to help us understand more about diastasis. So if you haven't heard of Dan Lee, she's definitely someone to look up. She's a physiotherapist based in Canada. But her research really helped us understand that, that it's a really nice way of describing it. And again, I'm simplifying it, but it's still, the concept is relevant. If we normally have our rectus muscles quite close together with a bit of connective tissue in between, that's the linea alba. With pregnancy and changes, we can end up having some widening. So the linea alba might thin and widen, and the rectus muscles are a wee bit further apart. But what can happen is this tissue can be quite slack. It can be untense, which means that the abdominal wall will likely still function quite well, but it might not load across that midline connective tissue effectively. And that's why you may find that the tissue just domes or sinks in and sags. You can still function, yes, but if you want to make changes at that midline, we know that connective tissue responds to loading. So if we think of bone healing, tendon healing, muscle healing, you need to load it to stimulate that change in collagen and that lay down. So what Diane Lee's research really helped us understand is that by tensioning the nice connective tissue in the middle and then loading it, we get a much better response. So how do you do that? Many of you may be wondering. Well, different strategies work for different people. There's no one-size-fits-all approach. A lot of people tend to find that if they even think of recruiting their pelvic floor, they can get that automatic tension in. Others may have to think of doing their transverse abdominis. So I'm sure everybody's aware of that muscle. It's the muscle that you tend to think of from a Pilates class. It's our core, deepest abdominal muscle. So it's that idea of drawing the lower tummy in as if you're doing a tight button in your jeans, or thinking of the two hip bones, the wee pointy bony bits at the front, and thinking if they were joined together by guide wire, if that was being pulled and they were being pulled closer together, oftentimes that stimulates our transverse abdominis. But it doesn't really matter what strategy works for you. It's just finding out. Another cue that I would use for women who, if they're really struggling to get some tension, I would just simply get them to exhale and see, does that have a natural response? Because our bodies are actually quite resilient, and they tend to work, and muscles tend to work when they should work. Sometimes better when it's a subconscious way of doing it rather than trying. A lot of women with diastasis tend to overcook the cues. So we're used to, particularly if we have abdominal separation, we tend to want to support our tummy. We tend to hold our tummy in. I think in this day and age, many women, because of social media pressures and that unrealistic expectation to snap back, we tend to hold our tummy. I know that every time I am teaching someone to let go of their tummy, I realize I can let go of mine, and I tend to be someone who doesn't think, I don't think I hold, because I know I'm trying to normalize this concept. So I think it's just something in our society that we do. But I hope that helps explain the tension element of things and the importance of it. I was saying that I co-ran that campaign with Munira Houdani, who's another really great physio from Canada who does a lot of work in diastasis. So look her up, and you'll be able to connect with her. I've got the story highlights in my Instagram feed. If you go to my highlights, there's that DRA tension campaign, and you can follow that through. So there's lots of information about tension and some infographics to really help understand it. I'll actually share the infographic after, Emma, and tag you for you to share in your feed.
Oh yeah, that'd be amazing. Thank you. I want to just ask one more question before we go on to the ladies that have asked us questions, and that is, how does someone know that they should begin rehab? Is it down to a certain tension, a certain amount of fingers on testing the gap? What would you best recommend?
That's a really tough question, actually, because the consensus on diastasis, again, is quite, we still have a lot more research to even define what exactly constitutes diastasis, because we now consider it to be much more than the gap. So really those ideas of kind of thinking of a finger width gap are quite outdated. In saying that, if someone did have above 2 finger widths of gap, I probably would say it's worth accessing a physiotherapist or a health professional with postnatal training to get an idea. It's a really good practice for women in general just to get assessed after having a baby, because that way there's no guessing. You kind of know what you should be doing and what you shouldn't be doing. But certainly if you're postnatal, I wouldn't worry about anything in the first 8 to 10 weeks. All of us have an abdominal wall that's lengthened, and it's not just the linea alba that's lengthened, it's our entire abdominal wall. So all the muscles have been stretched and lengthened, and we do have that pendular appearance postnatally, and we need to start normalizing that a little bit more and expecting that a little bit more, because I think women be horrified at it, and you have to remember that that abdominal wall has been lengthened and under that length tension relationship for quite a prolonged period of time. It's not just going to go down overnight. And it takes,
I was agreeing.
Sorry. I was like, it takes working all the abdominal wall muscles. So it's not just about focusing on transverse abdominis and avoiding lots of other exercises. Diastasis rehab works best when it's the entire abdominal wall that is rehabilitated. And I always think, make it simple. If you think of any other area in the body, if you had an injury or if you had a weakness or you had some strain in it, you rehab the whole lower limb or the whole upper limb. You rehab all the muscles around it. You don't just pick one muscle in isolation and work with it. So it's trying to get that narrative out there and to, as you say, bust some myths.
Yeah. I think we're going to come on to that with some of the questions. So I'm going to go to a couple of them because I know some of these girls are on here now. So Helen Cog asked, it's quite a long question. I have diastasis after having my twins 18 months ago. This was her second pregnancy. And she had a 10 finger gap and now down to a 5, which is amazing. The look of my tummy is really getting me down, which I definitely hear so much about how much it affects women's self-esteem and mood, and so this is really sadly something we commonly hear. It's a pronounced bump. It's very tender. Without the exercises that she does, she suffers from backache, and she just really wants to get an understanding of, is it with exercises alone that she'll heal, or is it something that she needs to investigate more because she's really unhappy? So what are your thoughts?
First of all, kind of what you said, I would echo that. That well done, first of all, for having such a significant change in your abdominal wall. Anyone who's getting any sort of changes in their abdominal wall always makes me think that they have rehab potential, and I'm a huge fan of exhausting conservative rehab potential before thinking of anything else. I would speculate that rehab has not been exhausted, because I tend to find most women are capping what they do or are afraid to move in certain ways. So movement and loading of that abdominal wall is most likely limited. And I would be really interested to see what happens when you start to progressively load. So if you it depends on what type of exercise you're doing, but if you're not fully strengthening and addressing all muscles of the abdominal wall and getting back to harder types of exercise, I would advise you to seek the help of someone near you who will progress you through that, or feel free to even message one of us afterwards and see, just even to get a bit more information about what you're currently doing, because I echo and I understand and totally empathise with how it makes you feel. One of the things we found out in a recent piece of research that we did a systematic review of the literature, and it confirmed that like body image and is one of the biggest issues after having diastasis. So it's something that makes sense, and a lot of women are feeling. It makes sense that if you have a 5-finger width gap that you're going to have that pendular abdomen. I'd be really interested to see what happens when you address not just the midline, but all your muscles, so the rectus abdominis, the obliques as well. So don't be disheartened, and follow any of the links that we talk about today, because you may pick up some tips and advice about things that you could try. And if not, don't be afraid to drop me a message to see if I can specifically guide you where to go.
Yeah, because I think that's one thing that you're really keen on doing, is busting the myths about no to no exercise. You know, I'll never do a crunch again, never do a rotational crunch again. And this is one of the big things that we need to massively change the messaging about, is there isn't really a right or a wrong exercise so long as your tummy can manage the load that you're putting through.
Yes, absolutely, Emma. And look, this is something that has evolved over the years too. When I first started looking at diastasis over 10 years ago, I was avoiding certain exercises with my clients, and I was thinking that certain things caused it. But we know a lot more, and certainly since I've started to change my practice over the past few years, I'm seeing much better progressions with people. And it makes sense. We can't just avoid certain movements. Life has certain movements. There's no point telling someone they can't do a rotational crunch and then they're basically deadlifting and rotating with toddlers, and they're getting up out of bed in certain ways. We need to make moms strong and fit for purpose, and not limit them and cap them and give them fear for the rest of their life. I'm also a huge fan on having no limitations of exercise, because exercise is meant to be enjoyable. It's meant to be feel good. So to tell someone who previously CrossFitted or did high-level lifting or some sort of high-level exercise that they can no longer do that and they must do a different form of exercise, which they never had an interest in, is underserving women. And it's not what the exercise is, it's how you do it, and everybody will be as individual as the next person, because what you might be able to do with a diastasis, Emma, I might not be able to do with a diastasis, or I might be better at certain other elements that you're not better at, and it's all about meeting someone where they're at. It's the principles of rehab anywhere else in the body applied to the abdominal wall.
Yes, I love it. There was just one bit about Helen's question that I just wanted to focus on a little, because Dr. Sinead Dufour commented on this, and she again is someone we highly recommend you follow, a huge lead expert in the field, who also had twins, who also had a diastasis, and Helen mentioned that it's very tender around her tummy, and I think Sinead flagged, had she been assessed for hernia? And is that something that she should get looked at a little closer, given the tenderness of her tummy?
Certainly. Usually if someone has a hernia, there will be a bit of a lump, and they usually have a bit of a visible, like they might generally have a pendular abdomen, but they usually have one focal point that looks like a wee lump coming out at times, or they may find that they bend and lift or move and to get kids and things, and they get stuck momentarily, and they know that something has to nearly move out of the way. So people with hernias usually have those telltale sort of signs or symptoms, or the belly button if it's an umbilical hernia, you may find that the belly button looks like it's protruding significantly, and it's worth getting ruled out if you find that. But listening to that as well, I always find that diastasis, because it is something that significantly impacts on our quality of life, it affects our body image, it affects how we feel about our body in that area and how we feel about our recovery. It becomes a very emotive area as well, and if we can be quite fearful of it, and then you read the internet and you make yourself 10 times more fearful, because there's all these conflicting and fear-mongering messages. So I would wonder how much fear you have about like that idea of something touching the tummy, and would that be influencing how you feel? And because With diastasis, we tend to put a magnifying glass onto the area as well, because we're so micromanaging every single movement and decision we make with the tummy. And if we put a magnifying glass anywhere on our body, the brain is super alert to every input going into it, every touch, every tactile, everything. So it can magnify the response to it. So I would be interested to know if it is being driven by that, if you're quite stressed about the diastasis, if you're anxious about it, and that would make sense. If not, and you're having tenderness that isn't changing, it would be worth getting a hernia ruled out. If they rule out the hernia, then don't sweat it and try and think, right, okay, you know, the connective tissue is not ripped or torn. We're not fragile or broken with diastasis. We might feel weaker, but we're not fragile or broken. So we just need to then think, right, here's my starting point. I'm going to start rehab and I'm going to progressively get stronger.
She's good, isn't she? The next question is from Doc Britton. She says, I have a terrible diastasis now. She's 3 months postnatal with her second huge baby. I baby wear a lot and it's so uncomfortable on my tummy. I know it's not helping my recovery. Any advice?
So yeah, I think that flags up as baby wearing shouldn't really be uncomfortable. And again, I'd be looking to understand why it's uncomfortable, because even if you have diastasis, as I say, the connective tissue is not ripped or torn. It shouldn't really be uncomfortable. Is it uncomfortable because the baby's still quite young, so it shouldn't be anything to do with the baby kicking in at the midline. Again, getting a hernia ruled out would be a good idea. Did it say the mode of delivery, Emma? It didn't.
No,
maybe?
She didn't actually. No.
Because I'm wondering, did you have a C-section and maybe just like ongoing tenderness of the abdominal wall? A lot of people, again, there's a lot of information about baby wearing out there, and I don't think wearing a front-loaded baby carrier is going to damage your diastasis. It's probably quite protective to your tissue because you've got something there against it. So I want to kind of debunk that myth, because I think women are putting a lot of pressure and guilt on themselves for decisions they're making. I know with my kids, I have 4, I couldn't have survived without having a front-loading baby carrier. I needed hands and I needed just even a settled baby. And so take the pressure off that and let that be the green light. But it should be comfortable. Now, if after hearing that you're still having ongoing pain with baby wearing, it might be worth going to a sling meet, because a lot of sling meets in your local area are just free. I know that we're restricted now with COVID. I don't know if they're happening online, but it can be worth getting an idea to see, are you wearing a sling properly? Is there a better design of a sling that might work better with you? Because it really should be something that actually feels more comfortable than having to carry a baby without a sling. So I'd be interested to hear that. I'd be interested, if not, for you to get the abdominal wall checked by someone, whether that's a physiotherapist, whether that's your GP, whether that's seeing some sort of consultancy if there's a hernia or if there's any issue you need to follow up. But I hope that even maybe some of this has relieved some of the fear, and that maybe that might be enough to kind of make you content with the baby wearing.
Yeah, brilliant. And I'll just add to that by saying that London Slings are brilliant. They do lots of online consultations for baby carrier wearings, and particularly if you're based in London, you can certainly go and see them once we're out of tier 4. And Lucy Allen, the physio, has done some great research around baby carrying, more around prolapse, I believe, but she's someone else again who has some great information out there, so she's worth a follow to understand more about baby carrying in particular, amongst other things. So this next question is quite fitting, because I just saw before I came onto Instagram that Lulu Adams had posted about you doing some work with her. Lulu's pregnant with her 3rd baby, and has, you know, openly had diastasis and sought treatment for it. And I really like her post. I think it's something that these girls here who have asked about future pregnancies would benefit from reading. We won't go into detail with it now, but definitely go over to Lulu Adams and look at her current post, which you've contributed towards. But this next lady, terrific. I'm terrible at people's handles. I'm sorry. She's 14 months postnatal with her first baby and slowly recovering from diastasis. It's reduced from a 3 finger to a 1 finger in width, but it's still deep. she's buggy running, which is great, woohoo, with no issues, and her NHS physio is amazing, but she just doesn't like the look of her tummy. She's particularly concerned about future pregnancies. So can you give women who are about to fall pregnant or who are pregnant with diastasis a little bit of guidance there, Gráinne, please?
Yeah, and this is a huge fear that a lot of women I see have, because particularly if they've done some rehabilitation, like this lady was terrific. I can't remember the handle, but
You're making
if they've done, I know, I don't know it. If they've done some rehabilitation, it can often feel like you can be torn because you've made some progress and you're nearly afraid of that regression, which is a really common fear. In my clinical experience, so this is not evidence-based as such, maybe that would be a nice study for anyone out there who wants to do one, but in my clinical experience, anyone who I've managed with diastasis after, say, their first baby or second baby, if they go on to subsequent pregnancies, they tend to not have the same degree of issues because they're so informed about diastasis. They now know kind of how to self-check, how to self-monitor, what to do, and they're not in this period of looking at conflicting messages on the internet, not knowing what to do, not knowing where to turn, restricting themselves. They just get on with it. So let that be the first thing that's reassuring. Second of all, you've done great rehab by the sounds of it, so you're in a really good position to go into another pregnancy. And if you've got it down to a one finger width, like really that would be considered in the norm. I know that you're saying that the depth is not your baseline. Maybe with a bit more loading, you'll find that that depth changes. And I want you really to look up that tension campaign we talked about, because it could be that you need to get just more tension, and that could make all the difference to the depth. But you can still do exercises and training during pregnancy. So pregnancy doesn't become a pause button where you suddenly have this time where you're going to regress and then you have to start all over again. There's lots of stuff you can do during pregnancy. And you mentioned Sinead Defer earlier, Emma, and Sinead actually was one of the lead authors on the expert consensus. So a Canadian team put out these really good expert recommendations for diastasis at all stages of the perinatal stage. So that's like pregnancy, intrapartum, so in delivery, postnatal, late postnatal. So we'll share a link to that as well, and share the title of it so that people can search that, because it's really worth finding out what the experts in Canada kind of all concluded in terms of what we should be doing. But simple things like that everyone should be getting into their day-to-day life. I was so happy at when Sinead's work came out, because they mentioned defecation dynamics, and that takes a huge bias on my list, because something like going to the toilet, something that we do regularly, from anything from a couple of times a day to a couple of times a week. If you're someone who strains because of constipation, you're gonna, if you think about it, when we bear down, we do use the abdominal wall, and we do create pressure in that abdominal cavity. So that could be something that you're doing regularly that kind of puts excessive pressure against that abdominal wall. And it's one of those things, which is the chicken and the egg, because sometimes we find that women who have abdominal separation find it harder to empty their bowels and may feel the need to strain, and we don't know which factor caused which. But my big tip for everyone is using a footstool to empty the bowels. It can be transformative, so you can find that you just empty so much easier, it's so much more efficient, and we can share a link about that as well. I think it's in the pelvic roar blog that I did, and campaign. So we'll share stuff about that.
Yeah, amazing, thank you. We're never going to get through all of these questions, so I think if I don't know how you feel about this, but for the girls that we don't get to answer that were commented on my there's only a few more, but that commented, we'll get back to them directly, just so that they feel that they've had their questions answered.
Sure.
Okay, so we've got Leanne Jarrett. She has a gap of more than 5 fingers, and it's 3 knuckles deep with an umbilical hernia. It's baby number 3. Oh, baby number 3 is 10 months old, but she's actually had diastasis for 8 years. Any advice for her? Can she still rehabilitate it? Typically, a cliffhanger.
Absolutely, it's never too late. So that's another myth that we need to debunk. A lot of women think that they may have left it. Hey?
No, we lost you. But
I missed you there. I think I froze, or maybe you froze. Sorry, Emma. I was saying that it's not too late, so you can definitely rehab. And it's Oh, okay. It's not too late to rehabilitate. Oh, that rhymes. Woohoo! I'm gonna hashtag that. It's worth definitely accessing some help. Definitely look at all the advice we put out, because you may be able to pick up tips to implement yourself. and if not, you may find that you want to access a local pelvic health physical therapist or physiotherapist. We can signpost you if you're not sure of anyone. The Squeezy app and the Squeezy directory have lots of physios that you can access. And as I say, there's just lots of really good resources online these days, and we'll post plenty of those. But the umbilical hernia is something that's worth getting looked at in terms of whether it needs repaired or not. Not everybody with an umbilical hernia needs surgery. If it's not causing much bother, they often just wait and leave it, because umbilical hernias tend to be lower risk for strangulation. So that's usually one of the reasons why we repair hernias. If a hernia repair is on the cards, it's worth strengthening up the abdominal wall in preparation for that, and getting into good habits like we talked about with the defecation dynamics.
Oh, Louise, whilst we're hopefully waiting for Gráinne to come back on, did I say there was a connection between baby wearing and prolapse? No, Lucy Allen's work actually shows that by using a baby carrier, we don't see any increase symptomatic. We don't see any symptomatic decline in what am I trying to say? We don't see a decline in symptoms. But yeah, her work's really interesting, and I would certainly recommend looking at it. But no, baby wearing and prolapse is very very much okay. Obviously, if you're wearing your sling for, oh, I don't know, 2 hours, and you really feel symptomatic of prolapse, and it might be that you want to reduce down the amount of time you're wearing your sling to maybe an hour. So it's about listening to your body, but fundamentally, no, you can wear a sling and hopefully not affect your prolapse at all. So I hope that helps. And you very helpfully helped me there fill a gap, because I'm hoping that Gráinne is now coming back on. She's connecting. Oh man, this internet business.
I'm just trying to keep you guessing, Emma.
Oh yeah, thanks. It's okay. I managed to answer a little question myself then.
Good.
Not on Diastasis, but you know. Yes, what were you saying? Had you? I don't know where we lost you, because I got a bit sidetracked by the other question. Oh, hernias. So basically, you're saying if they don't hurt, then there might not be necessarily reasons to have surgery. If they're causing you issues, then absolutely there might be a reason to go and get that looked at further for query, maybe surgical intervention.
Yes, so I would basically say I don't like to make the call on that. I always get people to get their GP, or who would probably refer them to a consultant, to make the call on it. But sometimes they don't advise that, they might just leave it. Other times they'll want to repair it. If you are going for repair surgery, it's really worth strengthening up the abdominal wall and getting into good habits before you have the surgery, such as toileting habits, avoiding constipation, even just knowing good strategies for working out and using the abdominal wall, so that afterwards you're really in a nice position for your rehabilitation, because there's no point getting the surgery and then going back to those activities which contributed to that excessive abdominal pressure, etc. So I think that's something that's really important. But I'm really interested to see how you go with rehab, because as I say, it's not too late.
Yeah, amazing. Thank you. I reckon maybe one or two more questions, and then we'll sign off with some resources and further signposting. So once you've had a diastasis and you've rehabilitated, is it something you always have to work on? I'm really hoping you can hear me on this question. Do you forever have to do abdominal work so that it doesn't come back?
No, not necessarily, Emma. If you start to use your abdominal wall and progress and function well, it just starts to function well naturally through your life. And if you think of like injury recovery in any other area of the body, we might concentrate and focus targeted rehab on a knee injury, for example. But then once we progress through rehab, we don't think about doing our static quads or our isometric exercises or our knee drills. we progress on from things and we just use it functionally because it's working for us. So diastasis rehabilitation should be the same, and I really want that to be the message getting out there, because we need to stop this excessive focusing and like zoning in on the abdominal wall, and we need to just remember that when we start to hit our rehab targets and we start to return to the function that we wanted to, or surpass it, because a lot of women are actually stronger after having diastasis because they never exercised to the same level or tried to exercise to the same level as they did until they had a diastasis. So yes, once you start exercising adequately, you should find that you don't have to overly focus on it, and you're not going to do one wrong movement and undo all your good work, and you're not going to necessarily regress by not doing your targeted rehab anymore. So hopefully that's a huge weight off people's minds.
Yeah, brilliant. I reckon we've got one more time for one more. Do you get better recovery the sooner you start your diastasis rehabilitation postnatally?
So I don't necessarily think that the overall outcomes are any different depending on when you start it. The only thing that would be better about, obviously, the sooner we start something, the sooner we learn the education about what we need to do, and the sooner we start to implement good strategies, good things to do, good exercise. It means we're less likely to have developed compensatory patterns. We're less, it's hard because when someone goes longer with a diastasis, their body's smart. Our bodies are very intuitive, and they'll figure out a way to do things. When someone looks at you, it's not that what you're doing is wrong. It's just that if you're then looking to improve that diastasis in terms of its depth or its width or the appearance of it or the function of it, your physio may highlight that some of the strategies that you're doing, and what we mean by that is that you could be just bracing the entire abdominal wall when you go to do certain exercises. You may be breath holding. You may use a lot of your neck muscles to help out some of the trunk muscles. So our bodies are very, very smart. And it may be a case that you need to unlearn some of those behaviors, and you may need to learn to let go of certain muscles, which can often make you feel weaker. I often tell women this, that when I'm trying to tell them to let go of, say, gripping a lot of their upper abdominal wall muscles, they often feel that they're getting weaker initially because you're in a sense letting go. But then we're going to target up and rehabilitate the entire abdominal wall and be less focused on one more superficial muscle, if that makes sense. So the only reason I think it's better is because you're going to have less of those compensatory strategies. You're hopefully going to see changes sooner. But overall, if you're someone who's waited 8 years, you still should have the same rehab potential as you would have had it when you started. So hopefully that's reassuring for anyone who hasn't started rehab yet.
Yeah, brilliant. Ruth, Ruth Holmes, we will answer your question on the comments box, if that's all right. It was basically around HIIT, and quite a few people asked that question. So go on. I
actually think I've seen this, and if my internet holds up, I'll actually say something on that, because that's another one of the fears that people have about diastasis, is that they've maybe been doing a local boot camp or a HIIT session or some YouTube videos that are high impact and high intensity interval training, and they're a bit worried about it. Now, if you're doing that and your diastasis is either getting worse or not changing, it may be worth seeing someone, because temporarily you may have to either modify that HIIT session and modify how you do it, or you may have to just consider certain things and doing it like not breath holding, or maybe just learn another strategy. But you will be able to get back to it. And there is definitely elements within HIIT sessions that are definitely going to form part of the rehab that I would be giving people anyway. So we can give you examples of stuff and tell you which ones to modify for now. And no two women are going to be the same. So if you heard someone say that they had to stop HIIT sessions because they were doing sit-ups or planks and that was making their diastasis worse, that doesn't mean that it will make yours worse. And that's where individualized assessment is key, because there is no one size fits all. And actually, I'm a huge fan of giving people the highest difficulty of exercises that they can take at any one time, and progressively loading. So there's no such thing as everyone having to start at really basic exercises. I tend to assess people and keep stacking until they reach their ceiling, and then tell them how to work on that to get further. So hopefully that reassures you. But it'd be definitely worth looking at the tension campaign to see if you can pick up any nuggets as well. And I'll share I have an ebook on diastasis as well that I can share the link of, and if you wait till the new year, there's going to be Emma's going to have her book out at that stage, which has some information on diastasis as well. So what's it called again, Emma?
Why did no one tell me? And Gráinne actually helped. Well, she reviewed my chapter, so it has a lot of her whys. Yes, there's a section which you actually wrote, because it was just so important. I felt that the right information was coming from a true expert on the subject. So the chapter on diastasis, there's a little bit written by Gráinne, which is really, really helpful. So thank you. That brings us really nicely onto resources. So we've got your ebook, which is brilliant. It's not much money either, is it? It's what is it?
£5.99. Yeah.
It's a total bargain, and it's really, really, really good. And then so that's if you're looking for a resource as a patient. What else I'd highly recommend, if you are a healthcare professional or medic or fitness professional working with women with diastasis, is to do Gráinne's course as well. What's the name of your course, the actual name of your course, Gráinne?
Diastasis Revolution, Evidence-Based Assessment and Management. I basically pivoted like many. I had this course that I was teaching in person, and it was due. I had to cancel my Scottish leg of the course, where I was going over to the health trust over in Scotland because COVID landed. And I finally got to, I'd been planning to put it online for so long, and eventually got there. It's been out since March, I think March time. And you know what? I've had lots of people come through it, and I've had really positive feedback, which I'm delighted about. One of the really key things that I like about it, which I wish I had when I was starting out in diastasis, is that we have like a fly on the wall type case study chapter, which is the authentic video capture of the management of Claire Black, who's a patient who's publicly put her diastasis journey out there. And she's been so kind as to let us share our input and journey with her. So I've worked on her alongside Lindsay Whitson and Anthony Lowe. And you can see all the consults I've done with her, and even the setbacks. And because real life and rehab is not just a smooth sailing journey, and oftentimes there's some bumps in the road. And I think it's important that we see that, because usually when we either go and see case studies or we look on the internet, we see the cherry pick, the good parts of rehab. And I think as a clinician, it's important to realize that everybody, even people teaching courses and even the experts in the field, have bumps in the road in terms of what's happening with their clients, or maybe reach a plateau where they have to think where to go. And that's why we're always constantly learning. I'm constantly learning. And this is one really, the feedback on this has been that that's been really beneficial for people to see how we navigated sessions and how the progress has went. And you can really see how the application of the theory that you learn in the course is applied into that section. So anyone has any questions about the course, please get in touch. If you enroll for free, you get to see some preview of the content and the full course outline as well.
Well, I have just started it. I'm so ashamed that I started it. I've done about half an hour of it, and our life has been crazy busy. But my plan over Christmas is to flip and finish it, because I've had it since March. I mean, how awful to admit that, but it's not.
What was the half an hour like? Was it okay?
It was awesome. It was brilliant. It was brilliant. But I just know, because I've got loads and loads of colleagues who have no reason to tell me it's brilliant, other than it is brilliant. So I can't recommend it enough, and I'm going to recommend it even more once I've actually completed it.
Well, do you know what though? Mine's not, I always like to tell people, mine's not the only course out there. We're in an age where, again, when I started in diastasis, people didn't even know what diastasis was. It wasn't really recognised in the NHS. It wasn't, you Googled, and there was very little coming up about it. We're in a really, really good time, because there's multiple people internationally putting content out about diastasis, and really good informed evidence-based content. So we mentioned Munira already. She's got a course out as well, so definitely check that out. Anthony Lowe has a course out. Sinead is actually doing a course, I think, through Reframe Rehab. And there's another area, Sinead, if you're ever listening to this, write down where your courses are, because there's somewhere else I've seen your courses as well. And Julie Weed does lots of good information on diastasis. Am I missing anyone, Emma? I always hate missing people. If I've missed you, I'm sorry, but I'll shout out to everyone. Who?
Only Diane Lee.
Oh yes, of
that we've
course,
mentioned.
Diane. Yeah, and she's taught me so much.
The
And
Queen.
Diane's got a really good book out as well. Split down the middle, the aspect dominant split down the middle. So look up all these people. If I think of anyone else, I'll write it in the comments as well, because there's just so much out there. And you know what? Claire Bourne actually did diastasis a live with me at one stage as well, where she demonstrated assessing diastasis. So it'd be really useful for anyone looking how to assess it to pop on to her highlights and see that story as well.
Yeah, I'll put that on my stories as well, because that's something well worth catching up with. So the other thing we wanted to just mention is that as you may or might not know, Gráinne and I are doing a podcast together called At Your Cervix, and we've just done a really cool interview with Stephanie Bruce, who is a long distance runner, American. She's amazing. She is a mum of 2. She's had diastasis. Her take on diastasis is really empowering, and I think it really brings us back to how we should be reframing postnatal bodies and the bounce back concept, and I would really love it, but also highly recommend listening to that podcast. If you head over to our other Instagram page, At Your Cervix, the podcast, we'll put a link to it. But the other thing that I was going to say is that I think our plan is, if you head over there, we're probably going to do a little competition where you can win 1 or 2, well, I'm not sure how many we're going to do yet, but 1 or 2 of Gráinne's ebooks, and possibly, if you're a healthcare professional, win a opportunity to do the course for free. So come on over, follow us, and we'll be publishing or announcing that competition sometime this week. But do take a listen and subscribe to our podcast as well, because we would just love it if you heard other episodes as well. In terms of other signposts we should be thinking about, we'll pop them on our stories if we haven't mentioned anyone else. But I hope we've busted a few myths there. I really hope that Gráinne's given you some clarity on diastasis. Can I take a bit of credit? And
of course.
And if you've got any questions for us, then do DM us. We can't nearly lost me then. We can't really give individual advice, but we can give general advice, and we are taking a break over Christmas, but we will get back to your comments and questions. Gráinne, anything else to add that I might have forgotten?
Well, no, things that I'm just been thinking of in case I forget it when I get off is that any health or fitness professional looking at this, I'm keep tuned to my page. I'll keep sharing information. In January, I'm doing a 1-hour webinar for the Journal of Women's Health Physical Therapy, which is free to access. And it's just American, it's USA times, that's the only thing. But it's flexible enough for me to be there, so people in the UK and Ireland will be able to attend. And the only other webinar which is accessible for both health professionals or patients and members of the public is the one I did with Janice, my pelvic floor muscles. We'll share the link to it, but there's a webinar there that you can access on diastasis, which has graphics and videos and a few things that might debunk things or make things make sense. It's not, as far as I remember, it's through Janice's platform, I'm not sure, but I don't think it's terribly expensive to access. But we'll share a link and see. But Emma, I want to say that the amount of myth busting that you're doing and the information you're putting out there and the opportunities for me to come and speak, it's fantastic, and I think you're doing such a service helping women, so I really appreciate it, and thank you so much.
Oh, stop it, you'll make me cry. Oh, thank you. Thank you so much for taking the time, because I know how ridiculously busy you are. And if you're not following Gráinne already, she's at what is it? At ABSOLUTE.PHYSIO.
At ABSOLUTE.PHYSIO. Yeah, at ABSOLUTE.PHYSIO.
This poor woman has to work with my poor memory. It's quite shocking.
I need to stop being so confused, and I should have just, I'm very complex.
You're brilliant. You're brilliant. I love you. And thank you. And I really hope this helped. And listen, have an amazing Christmas for what it's going to be for all of you. I know there's some of my patients on here, and so I hope you all have an amazing Christmas. And I'm sorry it's not going to be quite how we all wanted it to be, but I think most of us have got kids, thank goodness, because it does bring some Christmas into the household at least. But I'm going to love and leave you now and let you go and see your 4 very hyperactive children who are very excited about Christmas. So thank you, and I'll probably catch up with you tomorrow.
Wreck in the house, no doubt.
Yeah, probably. My kids are. I can hear them going manic downstairs. So thank you. I love you. I think you're brilliant.
Okay.
And,
thanks, Emma. Thanks, everybody. Great to chat. Bye.
See you. Bye. Thank you, guys. See you soon. Have a great Christmas. Bye.
Thanks.